It was a morning thick with fog, October of 1823, when the people of Charleston County awoke to a discovery that would echo through their town for generations. At the Ravencraft Plantation, 7 enslaved souls had vanished in the night. Their chains lay cold and open on the ground, and beside them a single parchment, stained with blood, pressed with the seal of Colonel Thaddeus Ravencraft. What was written inside that paper would unravel a story of greed, betrayal, and cruelty so precise, so calculated. It reached into the highest chambers of Southern power. For nearly 200 years, the Ravencraft family poured wealth into burying this story, keeping it hidden in dust and shadows. But newly unearthed letters reveal the truth behind what history now whispers as the Wedding Gift Massacre. A truth that not only shattered the Ravencraft name, but reshaped the power structure of an entire region. Before we unmask the darkness surrounding Colonel Thaddeus Ravencraft and his sinister bridal gift, make sure you're subscribed for more forgotten mysteries of America's haunted past. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing where our fellow seekers of history's shadows reside. The document recovered that night would later be described by Charleston's mayor as the most damning evidence of deliberate human cruelty I have ever seen. But to understand its full weight, we must turn back the clock back to Charleston County in 1822, where the antebellum South was reaching its peak. Cotton rolled across the fields like endless green oceans. Its prophets built grand estates, lit glittering banquets, and mirrored the excess of European aristocracy. Among these lords of the soil, none commanded more reverence than Colonel Thaddeus Ravencraft. A veteran of the War of 1812, he stood over 6 feet tall, eyes of cold steel gray, his beard trimmed with military precision. His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience, whether from the soldiers he once commanded, or the 200 enslaved men and women who bent beneath his rule. Those who knew him described him as brilliant, disciplined, and utterly unyielding, traits that built his empire and would one day destroy it. The Ravencraft Plantation stretched over 3,000 fertile acres of South Carolina soil. It's worked by enslaved families whose histories intertwined with the land itself. Yet unlike many planters who reduced their slaves to nameless entries on a ledger, Thaddeus kept disturbingly detailed records. He tracked each man and woman's skills, their kinships, even their monetary worth, adjusted month by month like livestock prices at a market. His bride-to-be, Miss Cordelia Petton, came from Savannah's proudest lineage. At only 23, she brought with her the grace and polish expected of a Southern lady alongside an inheritance vast enough to expand the Ravencraft empire. Their engagement, announced in the spring of 1822, was hailed across counties as a perfect union. Military honor joined with old plantation money. But beneath Cordelia's beauty was a mind both sharp and ambitious, and a heart warped by the wealth she had inherited, raised under Horatio Petton, a man who made his fortune not only in cotton, but in the buying and selling of enslaved people across multiple states. Cordelia had learned to see human beings as commodities bred, broken, and traded at will. Unlike the women of her circle, whose concerns stopped at household management and social calendars, Cordelia showed an unusual hunger for plantation economics. She questioned crop yields, labor divisions, profit margins, and Thaddeus, charmed by her intellect, began sharing with her the kinds of numbers and strategies he usually reserved for business partners. By autumn, their wedding was declared the grand event of the season. Invitations traveled as far as Virginia and Louisiana. French champagne was ordered, musicians were hired from New Orleans, and imported china bearing both family crests was set to arrive from England. But beneath all this grandeur, Cordelia made a request of her fiancé, one that no Southern bride had ever dared to ask. During a private supper, as thunder rolled across the cotton fields, she leaned close and with chilling calm asked for a wedding gift. Not jewels, not carriages, not finery. She wanted ownership of 7 enslaved souls, a family of 3 generations. Husband, wife, their grown children, and 2 grandchildren. She demanded full authority over them, separate from her husband, with the right to carry out her plans without interference, opening a leather folio. She laid out notes on each person with a clinical detachment that made even the hardened colonel shift in his chair. One child strong enough for the heaviest field work. A daughter skilled in herbal medicines. The grandparents seasoned in trade skills like blacksmithing and weaving. An ideal experimental group, Cordelia declared. Through letters with contacts in Cuba and Brazil, she had learned of methods too cruel for even the antebellum South systems of psychological manipulation. Force breeding, punishments designed not merely to break the body, but to sever family bonds and annihilate the will to resist. Thaddeus found himself torn. Her request defied every norm of marriage and property in Southern society. Yet he could not ignore the cold logic cotton prices were unstable. Planters everywhere searched for new ways to wring more profit from their slaves. If Cordelia's methods succeeded, it could be expanded across his empire. Thus was born what they called the Piton, a thought system that would use the Cain family as its test subjects. Charleston attorney Marcus Bellwether drew up secret legal papers transferring the 7 souls into Cordelia's possession. And Cordelia, calculating as ever, demanded that they be hidden in a remote corner of the plantation. In a building refashioned into a prison disguised as a workshop, the wedding day dawned bright. October 15, 1822, the Ravencraft estate glittered with silk ribbons and banquet, tables groaning with delicacies. Carriages lined the road for miles as South Carolina's elite poured in senators, judges, even the governor himself. In the garden pavilion, Cordelia shone in French silk, while Thaddeus wore his uniform with military pride. But the moment that cemented their legacy came during the gift ceremony. Standing tall before 200 guests, Thaddeus announced his bride's unusual request. He declared that, rather than jewels or pearls, he was gifting Cordelia the ownership of 7 enslaved souls, selected for their talents, their potential, their promise to pioneer a new age of plantation management. The crowd listened with fascination, then applause. To them, it was innovation. To Cordelia, it was triumph. To the Cain family, it was the beginning of an unspeakable nightmare. While guests sipped champagne and danced, the 7 captives were dragged to the hidden workshop. Reinforced walls, barred windows, and a central chamber of restraints awaited them. There, Cordelia's experiment would begin. Her methods were chilling. Family members isolated from each other, starved just enough to weaken but not kill, lied to about one another to sow mistrust. Forced into competitions where a father's failure could mean punishment for his child, she called it productivity bonding. It was cruelty dressed in the language of progress. But cruelty, when pushed too far, forges not obedience, but rebellion. By winter, whispers of the missing Cain family spread through the quarters. Screams carried on the cold night air from the workshop in the woods. An elder, Martha Washington, began organizing prayer circles. What started as whispered prayers soon turned into secret meetings where fear gave way to unity, and unity to the first sparks of resistance. Unbeknownst to Cordelia, her method was not breaking spirits. It was building a fire, one that would soon consume everything she and Thaddeus had built. Throughout the antebellum South, whispers of innovation and slave management spread like wildfire. Cordelia Ravencraft believed she had unlocked a cruel secret, a system that promised to shatter the human spirit and rebuild it into perfect obedience. If her method succeeded, she would be hailed as a pioneer. If they failed, her name would be dragged through the mud of Charleston's planter. Elite. By early March of 1823, the spring planting season loomed. Fields were being plowed, tools repaired, and supplies stacked high. This was the true test. After 5 long months of calculated torment, Cordelia prepared to reintegrate the Cain family, 7 enslaved souls she had broken apart, or shaped, and studied like animals. To the outside world, it seemed she had turned them into docile workers. But beneath the surface, a far more dangerous transformation had taken place. The Cain family had not crumbled. They had sharpened. Months of punishment and isolation did not break David Cain, the youngest brother. Instead, it forged him into something colder, a mind set on vengeance. In silence, he mapped every creak of the wooden floors, every unlocked door, every blind spot of the guards. He turned Cordelia's laboratory into his own battleground. Communication was forbidden, yet the Cains found ways. Scratched markings, hidden knocks, glances exchanged at just the right moment. While Cordelia saw isolation, they built conspiracy. What she mistook as obedience was in fact strategy. A family bound by one singular mission: escape or revenge. The breaking point came on March 15th. Cordelia announced her final test. Little Sarah Cain, just 6 years old, would be taken from her mother Mary forever. Forced to serve in the big house where she could be seen but never held, Cordelia claimed this would prove that love itself had been eradicated. But when the overseers came for Sarah, they met resistance unlike anything they had faced before. David Cain stepped forward, his defiance calm, calculated. The overseers expected submission. Instead, they were met with precision. In minutes, both men lay dead, not from wild chaos, but from a plan executed with surgical exactness. Tools had been turned into weapons. The hunted had become hunters. That morning, Cordelia walked confidently toward her experimental building, her notes tucked under one arm. She believed she was about to witness the triumph of her program. Instead, she entered a nightmare. Inside the instruction room, the overseers lay butchered. The air smelled of iron and smoke. Around them, the walls bore evidence of months of preparation, tools reworked into blades. Escape routes carved into shadows, messages etched into wood. And there stood David Cain. No longer the shattered man Cordelia had tried to create. He was something far more terrifying, a leader forged in torment. His family stood at his side, not scattered and broken, but aligned in formation. Mistress Cordelia, David's voice cut through the silence, steady and cold. We've been waiting for you. What followed was not rage but testimony. The Cain family laid bare every detail of her crimes, every note of her twisted science. They understood this was bigger than revenge. Cordelia's methods were not meant for them alone. They were a blueprint for plantations across the South. If she lived, her system would spread. And so, they resolved, it had to die with her. By midday, Cordelia Ravencraft was dead. The Cain family vanished into the pine forests, leaving behind not just a crime scene, but a message. The building had been transformed into a grim archive of cruelty, every tool labeled, every record preserved, every letter exposing her network of collaborators. It was not rebellion, it was evidence. When Colonel Thaddeus Ravencraft found his wife's body that afternoon, he also found the ruins of his own world. Her death was brutal, yes, but the documents surrounding her were worse. They revealed that Cordelia's project was no isolated experiment. It was a coordinated plan, one that involved other wealthy planters across the region. Panic set in. By nightfall, riders were sent to neighboring estates. The elite convened, not to mourn Cordelia, but to contain the scandal. They called it comprehensive suppression. The story they would tell the world was simple. Cordelia had died in a random slave uprising. The truth, the torture, the experiments. The Cain family's precision strike would be buried, but secrets have a way of slipping through cracks. Within weeks, anonymous letters began appearing in abolitionist newspapers in the North. Letters filled with details only an insider could know. Layouts. Overseers' names. Cordelia's own words copied from her correspondence. The cover-up was unraveling. Banks turned on Ravencraft. Merchants demanded payment. Neighbors shunned him. His plantation, once the pride of Charleston County, became a fortress under siege. Resistance spread like fire, tools sabotaged, overseers vanishing. Livestock poisoned by the winter of 1823, Ravencraft's empire lay in ruins. And on January 3, 1824, standing in the hollow shell of his mansion, Colonel Thaddeus made his final confession. He revealed everything: Cordelia's program, the network of planters waiting to adopt it, the conspiracy to bury the truth. His words sealed not only his own downfall, but the permanent stain of the Ravencraft name. The Cain family was never seen again. But their legacy echoed in whispers, in letters, in the growing fire of abolitionist movements across the country. On parchment soaked in ink and blood, the colonel's confession revealed a nightmare greater than anyone had imagined. It spoke of plans to shatter human will so completely that resistance itself would become impossible. Names, dates, allies, hidden hands stretched across the South, wealthy families funding Cordelia's work. Waiting to test her methods on their own fields, sheriffs, judges, and politicians promised protection in exchange for a share of the innovation. The horror was not the work of one mind, but of a system built on cruelty disguised as progress, yet the confession carried
secrets
Ravencraft never meant to expose. Among them, the truth about the Cain family's escape. They had not simply fled into the fog. They had forged contact with abolitionist networks, slipping information north, maps of vulnerabilities, lists of weak points, whispers of sabotage. Their leader, David Cain, possessed a mind sharper than chains could hold. He read the system like a book, connected across color and class, and turned pain into strategy. For the first time in Southern history, a single enslaved family had become a strategic threat to slavery itself. Crops withered, equipment broke. Resistance spread across plantations that had never heard the Ravencraft name. Northern allies fed the fire. Whispers turned into organized sabotage, and enslaved workers, once thought broken, carried intelligence across borders. What the South feared most had begun to take shape: a network, a movement, an army of the invisible. But the most chilling revelation was yet to come. Cordelia Ravencraft, the architect of cruelty, had not died on March 15th, as the cover story claimed. The Cain family had taken her alive. For hours, perhaps days, she endured her own methods, each torment mirrored back by those who had suffered under her hand. Her death was no accident, no burst of rage. It was deliberate, precise, and poetic. She became the final lesson of her own experiment. Cruelty does not break all spirits. Sometimes it forges weapons. By 1824, the plantation was abandoned, creditors tearing apart the remains of its fortune. The colonel himself vanished. Whispers say he fled to Mexico. Others insist he took his own life. But his papers lived on. In the North, abolitionists brandished them as proof. Slavery was not merely labor, but systematic torture. And in the South, whispers of the Cain family inspired thousands who had believed escape was impossible. 7 souls had turned agony into a network of defiance. Decades later, the ruins of Ravencraft lay silent. Locals told of ghostly lights flickering through the broken halls, of cries carried on the wind, of figures searching in overgrown cotton fields. But history remembers something darker than superstition. It remembers that the plantation's greatest legacy was not the wealth it built, nor the cruelty it perfected, but the reminder that even under chains, the human spirit could rise, resist, and destroy the very system meant to break it. The Ravencraft papers remain scattered in archives, fragments of truth hidden among dust and denial. Yet they whisper still of power abused, of spirits unbroken, and of the dangerous truth that when cruelty is disguised as progress, resistance is not only possible, it is inevitable.